Good morning, crew of Miss Montana. This is your weather briefing for Wednesday, May 22nd. Your briefers today are Debbie Sham and Dan Halperin. We're looking at the current surface analysis, and we see that we have high pressure situated to the west of our route today, low pressure to the east, which means we will have northerly winds to contend with today. So we'll have to deal with some headwinds on the trip up to Goose Bay. The current satellite imagery is showing us that we have pretty good conditions cloud-wise between Oxford and northern Maine, and then once we get from northern Maine into Goose Bay, the cloud coverage increases considerably. A lot of these are lower level clouds, but there are some scattered mid-level clouds as well in a secondary layer. We have some air mets in effect. We've got icing air met out for northeastern Maine, starting at 12 Zulu with the icing threat between 4,000 and 13,000 feet. This will continue into 15 Zulu with a bit of a southward expanse into eastern Maine. And by 18 Zulu, it's really just the extreme northeastern parts of Maine, but that still is including the Presque Isle area. So the lower bound of the icing threat increases to 5,000 feet by 18 Zulu. We're also concerned about some low-level turbulence. So starting at 12 Zulu, the turbulence threat extends from the surface to 10,000 feet over all of New England. By 15 Zulu, we find that the area of the threat remains the same, but the upper bound of the icing threat decreases, or sorry, the turbulence threat decreases to 8,000 feet. And then by 18 Zulu, again, surface to 8,000 feet, but northern Maine should be in better shape at that point. We also are concerned about mountain obscurations in parts of Maine due to clouds, precipitation, and mist at 12Z. This will continue into 15 Zulu, and then as we get into 18 Zulu, we find that this threat begins to dissipate. So mountain obscuration primarily 12 Zulu to 15 Zulu today. The radar imagery across the region, not showing a whole lot in terms of radar return echoes at this time. We could see some precipitation in northern Maine, again associated with that mountain obscuration air met, but currently things are looking okay. Here are the forecast freezing levels starting at 11 Zulu this morning. Around Oxford, we see freezing levels above 10,000 feet. And then freezing levels decreasing as we head up toward Presque Isle. So between Presque Isle and Goose Bay, on that segment, we're going to expect freezing levels between the surface and 5,000 feet. If we look at our forecast temperatures aloft, this is at 5,000 feet. So notice temperatures starting off in the 30s around Oxford, generally in the 20s across Presque Isle. And generally in the 20s from Presque Isle northward to Goose Bay. So that 5,000 foot freezing level is going to be moving to the northeast, north and east, I should say, throughout the day, but still below freezing temperatures for your Presque Isle to Goose Bay segment. At 10,000 feet, we're going to be below freezing across the segment, with the exception of Oxford, but once we get north of there, temperatures turning colder and turning below freezing quickly. Between Presque Isle and Goose Bay, temperatures predominantly in the teens. The icing potential, again, we saw the air met for icing potential across parts of northeastern Maine throughout the day today. From Presque Isle up to Goose Bay, we see a large area of higher moisture content. So the green is where relative humidities are greater than 70%. And we also find that the freezing levels here are below 5,000 feet. So this is generally the area where we think that lower, more solid cloud deck is going to be, generally near the 5,000 foot level. As we look at 10,000 feet, once we go from Presque Isle over to Goose Bay, we cannot rule out the threat of icing at 10,000 feet, but you can see an overall drying trend throughout the day at 10,000 feet. So conditions look to be improving, but we still could see some scattered clouds at 10,000 feet, so we cannot totally rule out the potential for icing at that altitude. We're looking now at some air mets across Canada, and from the Presque Isle to Goose Bay segment, there are a couple of things to be aware of. One is that there's an area of mechanical turbulence and low-level wind shear from the surface to 3,000 feet. If you stay west or on the western edge of Anticosti Island here, you should avoid that area until you get into your approach on Goose Bay, near Goose Bay. So on approach into Goose Bay, be aware of the threat of mechanical turbulence, low-level wind shear below 3,000 feet. The other primary concern is for mixed icing, patchy mixed icing. This will primarily be between 2,500 feet and 5,000 feet. So again, if you're flying up at 10,000 feet, conditions in general will be drier than they are at 5,000 feet. But as you're descending into Goose Bay, be aware that there is that icing potential. So you want to descend below the freezing level or below the cloud deck as quickly as possible on approach to minimize your icing potential. Here is the sounding from Goose Bay, showing that the relative humidities are fairly high across the area. The temperature and dew point lines are pretty close together. Ceilings have been improving, and they're forecast to improve a little bit more throughout the day today. So again, the recommendation is just as you're on descent to quickly descend through the cloud deck or below the freezing level. We've also been showing the crews this product. This is your sea ice and iceberg analysis. So the area between the coast and the dashed magenta line indicates where you have sea ice, and then between the dashed magenta line and the solid magenta line is where we have icebergs analyzed with a number of icebergs there given by the numbers in each square degree. And so the primary threat of icebergs is on the segment shortly after departing Goose Bay on the way up to Greenland. So not a concern for today, but just wanted to show you these types of charts so that you can be familiar with them as your journey continues. We also look at the sea state analysis, which has the wave heights in meters. So along the segment from Goose Bay up to Greenland, currently the wave heights are generally in the 6 to 10 foot range. We're going to see an area of low pressure intensifying across the North Atlantic over the next couple of days. And as this low strengthens, the wave heights are forecast to increase to the point where we could have some wave heights just south of Greenland on the order of 20 to 25 feet, a bit lower than that along what will likely be your route of flight out of Goose Bay, but the wave heights certainly increasing over the next over the next 48 hours. Here are your forecast winds aloft. This is at 5,000 feet. So we'll focus on the Oxford to Presque Isle segment first. Here the winds at 5,000 feet will be a little bit lower than they will be at 10,000 feet. Given that and the fact that the icing potential is from 4,000 to 13,000 feet across northern Maine, probably would recommend a 5,000 foot cruise altitude here between Oxford and Presque Isle, just given the more favorable winds, and since the skies are generally clearer on this segment, there shouldn't be as much of a threat in the way of icing until you get up to northern Maine. Of course, if you are flying at that altitude, there is some terrain to be aware of. Mount Katahdin, for example, has an elevation of 5,300 feet. It will be a northerly wind, so it will be a headwind here throughout the entire segment. From Presque Isle up to Goose Bay, that's true as well. And then winds increasing at 5,000 feet as you approach Goose Bay. Remember, from Presque Isle to Goose Bay, though, we have that more substantial icing threat at 5,000 feet. So along that segment, we would recommend the 10,000 foot altitude, which appears to be a drier altitude for the Presque Isle to Goose Bay segment. So here's the 10,000 foot winds. You can see stronger winds. Those white arrows are winds of at least 60 knots. Stronger winds from Oxford to Presque Isle, which was why we were recommending the lower altitude there. And then from Presque Isle to Goose Bay, 10,000 feet minimizes your icing threat. The headwinds are not as strong as they are from Presque Isle to Goose Bay as compared to what they are from Oxford to Presque Isle. Here's your current weather depiction showing mostly VFR conditions across New England, some exceptions up in northern Maine reporting MVFR conditions, MVFR also in Goose Bay right now. As we go forward in time, through the morning hours today and into the afternoon hours, we see that there are some MVFR conditions again expected in Maine and in the Goose Bay vicinity, and this will be true as we get into 0Z this evening as well. Your low-level turbulence forecast. So remember, there was that AirMet for low-level turbulence across New England. As we go over the next 12 to 24 hours, that appears to be the primary area where we're concerned about turbulence, northern New England, and then again on approach into Goose Bay, where we did see that, that area of mechanical turbulence and low-level wind shear below 3,000 feet. We've also been tracking volcanic ash. None of that is forecast through the next 18 hours. So we're going to zoom in here on your waypoints and along your stops here. So this is the surface wind forecast at Presque Isle. Generally expecting northerly winds today. So you can expect runway 01 at Presque Isle. Up in Goose Bay, we generally have northerly winds here as well. Depending on how much of an onshore component to the wind we have, winds are likely to either be favoring runway 34 or potentially runway 08 if we end up with more of the onshore flow. And we'll close with your METARs and TAFs. As of the time of this briefing, conditions looked very nice in Oxford. The forecast as we head up to Presque Isle, notice that we have ceilings that are forecast to increase across Presque Isle. So starting at 13 Zulu, ceilings at 2,500 feet. By 16 Zulu, those ceilings are forecast to dissipate with a scattered cloud layer at 4,000. And then while conditions in Goose Bay, currently we're seeing the ceilings of 1,500 feet. By the time we get to 18 Zulu, the forecast is for for ceilings to be at about 3,000 feet with a broken cloud coverage. Notice though the winds do become gusty around 18Z with winds at 15 knots, gusting to 25 knots. But that wind direction there favoring runway 34. If you have any questions, let us know. Otherwise, have a safe flight.